In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some workflow issues, how to use Maya, ZBrush, and Photoshop to take our textures and have some kind of pipeline set up to where we can move information back and forth between these different programs. So you can see I'm starting off and I'm here inside of Maya, and I'm using Viewport 2.0. We looked at the earlier video how to send everything over from ZBrush over to Maya using GoZ, and then using Viewport 2.0 to kind of take a look at the textures. So obviously I've done some more work to this thing, and I've added some shader elements to things, added the eyes in, and did some interesting things with Fresnel to get some of this kind of lighting information that goes around the edge of the character. But the main thing I'm going to be showing on this video is how we can get a texture pipeline set up to where we can start changing colors in something like Photoshop and then see those changes and updates inside of Maya. And then we can also use ZBrush to maybe paint new masks and things that we're going to use over in Photoshop. So I'm going to hop on over to Photoshop, and I did want to point out that I like to work in these layer groups here. So if you just click this new button down here for a group, you can make a group and give it any kind of name that you want. I like to group things. Obviously I've got my color, COL for color, norm for normal maps, spec, reflection, and then this is tightness here for the specularity. So you can see each one of these is saying something about this, is saying these parts are going to be the most reflective on here. It's going to be semi-reflective here, not very reflective maybe on the skin parts. The spec was created mainly from the color map, and that, like, if you have a layer group here, you can just drag this whole thing down to the new icon and it'll duplicate it, and you can start tweaking it from there. The normal map, that was saved out from ZBrush, and then we've got our color that we've got. So I like to separate everything into these groups. I'm going to show you inside of Maya. You can actually use a node in there instead of just a file node for textures. You can use a PSD node in there, and you can use that as your textures, and you can designate what group you want to pull from to build a texture with, which is pretty cool. So while I'm in Photoshop, I also wanted to call to your attention, I really like these solid color layers. And the reason I like them is because you can paint into a mask, and it can be either pure black and white, or it can be, if you're painting into this mask on this, you can have varying levels of softness. So you can see it's just like you would paint regularly inside of Photoshop. But the cool thing about these solid color layers is at any point you can double click on them, and then you can change the colors on it. So if you lay things out and you don't like the colors and you want to tweak it, it's very easy for you to go into these different solid colors and just change the colors on there. So it provides a workflow that makes it easy for you to update the colors. But then also, if you set this up correctly, if you're on a team with people and you need a bunch of different color variations, you know, for maybe the same character or something like that, it's easy to go back through here and build color variations on this, and you can change the look pretty easily and save out a new texture for that. So I'm going to just show you the solid color sits down in here. You just click here and say solid color, and you can tell it, you know, what color do you want to work with. So maybe I'm choosing something that looks like this right here. And the whole mask, when it first creates it, is going to be just a pure white, which is just going to fill the whole entire thing. So to get rid of that color, obviously if you turn on and off the eye icon, that's going to turn it off. But we can hide everything with the mask here. So we're going to select the mask, and you can see it's highlighted around here. You can see there's a difference if this is selected here or if the mask is actually selected. It's going to have that highlight around it. So now I could paint into the mask with black, and that's going to take away all the color. If I want to fill with that, I can hit Alt backspace, and that's going to fill with this one, or we can hit Control backspace, and that fills with this one here. So Alt backspace, and now I've filled the entire thing with black. And now I'm going to go choose a brush that's nice and hard edged, and I can just paint with this thing with white. So if I tap X to get white here, is basically that hotkey. X is switching these two things here. I can now paint into this with this brush, and I need to find areas that maybe I want to have that color coming through on here. So I'll just choose something like this back panel, back right in here, and I'm not going to get too specific with making sure I'm hitting the shape just perfectly, just because I want to draw this out pretty quickly and show you how to update this. So I'll go through here like this, just paint along these edges, come through here, and this is painting over the top of one of the layers, so you'll have to kind of make sure you're layering things in a specific way to make sure you're getting the colors to lay out how you want them. So the cool thing is I can quickly get this in here, and if I've painted over some edges, no big deal, because I can tap X and I can erase out. If I tap X, I can draw back in. So I can go back through and just try to clean some of this stuff up just real quickly, like this. Okay, and there, right there, and get that little piece there. Okay, so I was saying about the layering of this. This sits over the top of this gray, and I actually want all the metallic stuff to be present. So if I drop this underneath here, you can see now this gray is over the top of this, and I don't have to worry about that. And now they're kind of separated out. The other thing is, if you hold down Alt and you click on this, you can hold down Alt and keep clicking this little part here, and it'll show you exactly what the mask looks like in black and white. If I want to drag a marquee around this, if I tap M, if I drag a marquee around this and push it right here like that, and if I'm on the mask and it's highlighted, I'll put it on V for the move tool here, and if I hold down Alt and click and drag, I'm going to hold down Shift, and it's going to constrain the movement on that. If you hold down Shift, it constrains it moving left and right. So I've got this here, and I want to flip, I want a mirrored copy of this. I can hit Control T, and that puts it in transform mode, which I can, you can tweak this thing out like that. I'll hit on escape on that. Hit Control T, and if you right click on here, you can say flip horizontal, and then that's going to give you this exact shape over here, but it's going to flip it for you, obviously. So I'm going to push this thing, and you can nudge with the arrow keys left and right on this and get it in the right spot here, and hit enter like that, and hit Control D to deselect. And so now I've painted that on both sides. So again, if this is too strong for this color, I can go ahead and double click on it, and I can start to manipulate that color against the back here and try to fix, some kind of color harmony that's going to work a little bit better for that. And when I'm done, I'm going to tap F to get back to this viewing mode here. I'm just going to hit Control S, and I'm just going to save the document. So I've obviously just saved out one Photoshop file in here, and it's got all these different groups on here. So I'm going to hop back on over to Maya, and we'll update this. So I'm going to go to Window, Rendering Editors, and then Hypershade, and we'll take a look at the material that was set up for this. So this is the body blend. If I double click on that, here's everything that's being piped into it right now. And if you look at the color, I mapped that with, if you see any one of these checkers, you can actually click on it, and it'll give you some options to map it with something. Normally you would map it with File, but since we want to use a Photoshop file, you can hit this PSD file right there, and that's how you map it. So after it's been mapped, you can click any one of these little icons that you see right here, and it'll show you the actual node. So in the Photoshop file, it points to the image location. Then we've got this link to layer set, and you can see here's all the layer sets that I built up. So I got color norm spec, and I'm using this for color, so you just set it to color like that. And I have notice that I've been getting a lot of crashes whenever using this setup. And it's mainly if I go through and after I've set this for the first time, if I go through and try to reset these, I know I'm setting it back to color, but it has a problem with that. So not sure what the bug is on that, but after that's been set up, it's pretty easy to just update the files. So I'm going to restart Maya and I'll show you how to reload those files. So I know I changed that and it crashed, but if you kind of leave those settings alone after you've set it up for the first time, it seems to be pretty stable. So I'll be right back. And here I am back inside of Maya, and just because it reloaded the program, you can see that that texture has been updated in this area right here. It's pretty faint. Let me just hit 5 and then 6 without the lighting, and then that way you can kind of just see what's going on with the texture without the lighting information. So you can see that panel's been colored. So you could go through and update just one texture by itself. So if you go to rendering editors and go back to that hypershade, and then we go back and you can see the textures in here. Here's the PSD color file that I was using, and you can click reload. So by hitting the reload button, it's actually going to take the texture and it's going to reload it. Now there is a way that we can reload all the textures within the scene, and if we go to renderer and viewport 2.0 and go to the option box for this, we can say reload all textures. So you just click that and it's going to go through and update all the textures that you have in the scene instead of maybe just one texture that you have in the scene. The other thing that you can do is if we go to the script window here and we look at what was said for the part for updating that, we can find in the script editor that piece. So I'm going to erase everything. I'm going to go to history and make sure echo all commands is turned on, and I'll just click this reload all textures button, and you can see that this is the command for it right here. So you can just highlight that text, just click and drag, and then you can middle mouse drag that up to one of your shelves, like a custom shelf here, and save it as a mel. And if you want to put some kind of name with that, you can go to the shelf editor like this, and you can see that this is down in here. We can give an icon label. See, we're on custom for our shelf, then the shelf contents, and you can see at the very end here, which is at the bottom, this is this reload. So you can just type in REL or something like that, and if I hit tab, you can see this is what it's going to put up there for the letters. So it just should be enough to give you a reminder that if you hit that, it's going to reload all of your textures. And when I updated this, it looks like it did something with transparency, some auto transparency. So if I hit Control A and I get to the shader on this model here, looks like something got mapped to transparency. I can just right click and say break connection. That'll get rid of the transparency on there. I'll have to check my map over in Photoshop and just see if there was anything on here in the channels section, and it looks like there is a mask here, and it's just because I have this selected that it saw that alpha channel. So if I just click off of that and check on channels, you can see that there's nothing on there. The reason that was happening is because when we're using these solid colors, we had one of these actually selected, so it gives you a preview of what that channel has going on. So just make sure you click off of here, and then if I save the entire document, I might as well make some kind of change just so we can see this thing update. So let's see, these panels, I could make these just a little more kind of this reddish color like that, and then I'll click on this whole layer group here and hit save, Control S, and then hop back on over to Maya, and I'll close this down. Since we have this on a shelf, we'll just click that, and it takes a little bit for it to load all the textures, and here it is. But it is still giving me this connection with the alpha. So let's go to the rendering editors and go to Hypershade. Let's just check out this PSD node and make sure there's nothing funny kind of going on with that. So I'll go to the texture tab here, look at this, and I want to make sure that this alpha to use, it's not showing anything on there. You could actually, I think, designate the alpha on here if you wanted. So I guess we could try this, and we could go to channels and we could just make a new one, and this would say everything, I believe, is transparent, and if we fill it with white, it should be opaque. Let's just say this solid trans for transparency, and I got one character extra too many there. Let's just try that out and save that now, and we'll go on to Maya, and then we'll reload this texture and alpha to use, so we can put it on this solid trans. And let's take a look at our model. So I had the wrong color. I guess we shouldn't be using white, we'll use black. So let's go ahead and switch that. And this is good. This just shows you that we've got this pipeline working where we're doing updates in Photoshop, and then we can move on back over to Maya and see those updates. So I'm going to click the reload again, and the entire thing is transparent. So this thing was set up correctly then. It's just picking up some transparency from some map somewhere. So I'm going to go back on over to Photoshop, switch that color over again, save it out, go to Maya, and then reload like this. And I just want to make sure if we put it on default, see what happens. Nothing. So we've got this, and it is basically coming from the material. It just doesn't need any kind of transparency information at all. And so break connection. I wonder if we can lock the attribute for that and see what happens. So if we lock the attribute, it shouldn't be able to get any kind of transparency information at all. And if we go back on over to Photoshop and we do some changes, let's see what we've got here. And if this Photoshop document setup is just causing you too much headache, you can use just flat maps. So you could just save out a target file for this, and I've done this as well, and you can find a location. I was putting it under Maya under source images, and then you can call it some name of the file and then underscore, and I was designating norm, reflect, or spec or something like that. So you can save that out if this is just giving you too much headache. It's just, it will take you a little bit more time to save out a target map, and then you can update that. So that's why I was trying to use this Photoshop setup. So we'll try one more thing on here and see if we can't get some kind of change to happen and everything's working as we'd expect. So I'll hit Control S to save, hop back over to Maya, and then I'll just reload the textures at that point and see if we've got this working. So it looks like locking that attribute for the transparency will take care of that issue. So now we're just set up in a way that we can move textures back and forth between Photoshop and Maya. So what if we want to do some updates to our 3D model and we want to use ZBrush for this? So I've painted this. I'm designating these pink areas as maybe it's kind of like skin and it's going to bleed into the metal. And I don't like some of the things that I've painted, but sometimes it can be more difficult to paint certain things in Photoshop than it is to paint it in 3D, because we've got this UV layout where basically you can see this nice hard edge here. This is the front shell of my UVs. So if I go to UV texture editor window, you can see here's the front right here, and here's this paint that bleeds over, and it's going basically into this area. So it is going across the seam. If we turn on this icon here, that shows us the texture borders, and so you can see that if we're painting with a solid color, you can go across borders, and sometimes it behaves as you would expect, but sometimes it can be really hard to know what you're painting in 3D whenever you're actually painting in 2D. So we can actually use both Photoshop and ZBrush to kind of paint some different masks for us, especially if we're using this solid color method. So I'm going to hop on over to Photoshop, and if I just take this skin part that I've made with the solid color, I'm going to duplicate it like this, and I'm going to drag it out of this layer group information that I have, and I'm going to fill this whole thing with just white, like this. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to fill it with black, and I'm going to make a new solid color layer, and I'm going to make it pure white. So I'm basically building a black and white mask that I can push over to ZBrush. So here it is, and I'm going to save this out. I'm going to hit Control Shift S, and I'm just throwing it on the desktop real quick just to find it. So I'll call this body skin mask, like this, and I could save it as a Photoshop document. If you do that, ZBrush, once it's flattened, or I can save out a BMP. I'll save that, and here's the format for this. I think I want it as 24-bit in Windows. Hit OK. And now I'm going to hop on over to ZBrush, and I'm going to get that texture. I just hit the comma key to hide the light box. I want to pull that texture in, so I click Texture and say Import. I'll go to the desktop, and I'll find that body skin mask BMP. Open that up, and the texture should be right in here. I click on here, and we can turn the texture on. If we have that selected, and we have our subtool that we're working with, which is this body part, that's the only thing I'm really concerned about. So I just turned on solo for that, just to look at this with that. Now if we go to texture, we need to turn the texture on for this actual object. So we've loaded it into memory and into the program. Now we need to load it into this area so we can have it actually on our model. So I'll click here and click on the texture, and you can see it flip. So earlier in the videos I was telling you how it's a little bit annoying with the UVs being flipped inside of ZBrush. It's an easy fix. We just go to texture and we say flip vertical, like this, so it flipped the map, and now we click on it and click it again, and you can see how it's loading up for us at this point. Okay. Also, you might want to turn on anti-aliasing. You can see it's nice and crisp here. You can turn that on or off within the texture. I'll just turn anti-aliasing on, and I am using the Skin Shade 4 material that lets you paint with color information. It gives you something that you kind of helps with coloring. The other thing you can do is put it on this flat color shader, and it shows you only exactly what you're painting with color information. So my background's black, and that's probably not helping me out. I can go to document, I can go to back, and I could choose just some color within here, just some kind of lighter kind of gray. That's going to help me see the model much more clear. The other part is we could paint directly on a texture if we were using Zaplink, and I've got some other videos that I've made that you could go and look up and find out the whole painting process. So I'm not going too in depth with the painting process, just because I've made a lot of videos that show the whole painting process, and if you want to paint on textures, you're going to use Zaplink. But I want to use poly painting because I want to paint directly on the model, right in the program, and be able to rotate around. But I need to get this texture information into a polypaint mode. So that's pretty easy to push over. We just open up polypaint, and there's a button on there that says polypaint from texture. So you're going to transfer that texture to polypaint, and it's yelling at me, telling me that I need to at least have RGB turned on, or MRGB. MRGB is going to be your material and your color, and we just want to work with color. So let's just say polypaint from texture. I'm going to click that, and you can see that it is now transferred over. We could take a look at our texture map, and you see the texture's turned off. So the texture's not on anymore, and you didn't see any kind of difference, just because it does a good job of transferring over everything. So now I got my symmetry turned on. Tap X. I can turn off Z add. I don't want to paint with any kind of sculpting ability at that point. I just want color, so I just have RGB turned on, and we can click and drag out, and we're using a pure black to paint with. So I can start to pick out these different areas that I want to designate as flesh. So I'm going to be blending between the two, this fleshy part and this more mechanical part. So before I was just using pure black and white because I was painting in Photoshop. It was going to be a little bit difficult for me to kind of tell exactly what it was that I was painting. So I could add this nice gradient and kind of fall off where the skin might kind of flow into kind of metallic kind of features, which could be interesting. So I'm just going to keep painting on here. I do have lazy mouse turned on. You can tap L to turn that on or off, and then I could paint with white at that point and make my brush size smaller and really kind of get in here like this. So I'm going to just put this video in a time-lapse mode and go through and paint this out, and then when I'm done I'll show you how we can push that back over to Photoshop. Okay, I just wanted to tell you a few things that was going on while that time lapse was happening. So I've got a black color here and a white color here, and this alternate button is pushed. So if we paint with just the regular color, it's going to give us this white like this. But if I hold down Alt with this alternate button while it's pressed, it gives me this alternate color. So it's basically flip-flopping between the two. You could tap V and you could swap them that way, so that's another way of swapping the colors, but it works pretty well if you have this alternate button turned on. The other thing is, if I paint and I've got a really hard edge on something and I want to soften that, we can actually use the smooth brush. So if you hold on Shift, it will turn into the smooth brush. Just make sure you turn off the Z add and you only have RGB on. That way you can smooth out the color information and you don't have to worry about messing up the sculpt, and it's a nice way of softening up certain areas. So once this thing is painted out in the polypaint information, we need to transfer this back to texture. So we're working with the polypaint right here. You can see the colorize is turned on. We need to go to texture map, and then we need to say create new from polypaint, like this. So here's the new map that was created, and to get it out of the program, we say clone texture, like we have here. Remember, it's flipped, so we could go to texture and just say flip vertical, and then we could export that out. And then I'll just throw it on the desktop, and I'll throw it next to the old one that we had, which is a BMP. We can save it as a BMP if you want. And here's the old one, and then I'll just say 2 for that and hit save. And then we can hop back on over to Photoshop. And this is the mask that we generated. I'm just going to hide this stuff. Don't need it anymore. I'm going to hit Control O to open, go to the desktop, and then find this new version that I have, like this. And so here's our mask that we can use. We could do some cleanup to it. So I was having just a little bit of trouble. I noticed getting in on some of the areas really tight along the bottom of the jaw. So it might be actually easier. Sometimes it's easier to paint in 3D, and sometimes it's easier to paint in 2D. So you just kind of figure out what's the best way to kind of get the result that you're looking for. So I can just clean up some of these edges and through here like this. Come down along through here. And I think that should be pretty good. I'm probably going to just paint through some of this stuff. This is like overbleed for our UVs. Some of the different areas. I'll zoom back out. So I'll copy this, Control A to select all, and I'll hit Control C to copy. And then now I'm basically going to put that in the mask area that I've got of this solid color. So here's my skin that I was working on before. And remember, if we click on the mask, we can view it. And if we hold down Alt and click on it, we can just view just the mask and what it looks like. So we can hit Control V and paste while we're in this mode. I'll hit Alt and click on the mask again, and that'll take us out of there. So now here is our update with our texture with our mask that we made inside of Photoshop, and you can see that all the skin area is now painted out. It's actually the inverse of what I'm looking for, and I just set it up that way. It was a little bit easier to kind of see what was going on inside of ZBrush. To make the inverse of that, it's pretty easy. Just select the mask, hit Control I, and that gives us the inverse. So now you can see here's all the different skin for the chest and the shoulders and that little back piece. This is the inside of the mouth, and here's the head here. So now I can just close that up. I'm going to get rid of these pieces. Don't need them anymore. I'll hit save for this, and then we'll go back on over to Maya and do one last check, and we'll just click our reload all textures that we created earlier. And so here we go, and here's our newest update. So that's a pretty quick look at how we can set up this texture pipeline, how we can get things working from Photoshop and moving that across into Maya. But then also if we want to paint things in 3D, how we can paint that and use those as masks and update that information inside of Photoshop for our solid color information. Again, the solid color workflow is just to make it nice and fast for you to update the information in this color. You know, if I want to go through and change the color of the skin at anytime an art director comes by and says you need to update these colors and not happy with the color choices that you made, you're not stuck with a texture that you've painted. You actually have some kind of method of doing updates and getting a wide range of different looks.